in relation to any live criminal cases connected to Walleys Quarry. Order. Aaron Bell to move the motion. Aaron.
Thank you, Sir Gary. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I beg to move. I'd like to thank so many members attending today for their time and engagement on this important topic. I have a lot to say, but I will try to leave space for everybody else. I'd also like to welcome the Minister to her place and welcome the engagement that she has had with me since she took up her role late last year. I'd like to thank the Department for supporting that engagement, and her recent visit was incredibly well received in Newcastle. And I'm grateful she took the time to understand the nature of the problem I have in Walleys Quarry and to hear personally from affected members of the community, including school children. The key point I'm here to make today is that the current nature and scale of waste crime in this country is, I believe, beyond the capacity of the Environment Agency as a regulator. And I think the current regulatory regime is no longer fit for purpose for two main reasons: the changing nature of the crimes being committed and the failure of the Environment Agency to keep pace and to act with sufficient robustness of force against them. They have sadly become a regulator which is no longer feared, but is mocked, with criminals able to carry out offences even under their nose. Now, let's be clear at this point. Waste crime is not victimless. It threatens the environment and human health. It undermines investment, growth and jobs within the legal waste and resources sector. For the 2018-19 financial year, the Environmental Services Association estimated the cost of waste crime to be £924 million in England. It'll be over £1 billion by now. And that waste crime significantly reduces the viability and competitive advantage of legitimate businesses. They're being undercut by criminals, creating unfair competition and ultimately burdening the taxpayer or the landowner that has to step in when criminals walk away, leaving abandoned and toxic sites. As the House knows, I've raised the issue of Walleys Quarry repeatedly. We have an infamously smelly problem on our doorsteps in Newcastle-under-Lyme. It's made it all the way to the Court of Appeal and perhaps even the Supreme Court in the case of Richards v Environment Agency, which you referenced in your precursory statement, Mr Streeter. I do not wish to rehash the full story again. It's on the record and the Minister knows it very well by now. But I'd like to briefly mention that since the last time I spoke about this in the House, the hydrogen sulphide emissions have this year risen back up to levels not seen since May of last year when it was at its peak. Residents are reporting, I've smelt for myself, that the stink is well and truly back, very much present in their day-to-day lives. It's an ongoing, continuing problem, making some vulnerable people ill, affecting people's mental health and making many thousands miserable, affecting their quality of life. And the Borough Council are now very concerned that the posi shell capping, which was mandated last year, has failed, and there are now increasing fugitive emissions from the site. Together with the County Council, they now believe that the EA's normal regulatory approach has run out of road and are seeking a new approach. And I believe the Minister should have on her desk a letter from Councillor Alan White, the leader of Staffordshire County Council, making exactly this point and asking to meet with her to discuss. And I hope she'll be able to accommodate that. What I'd like to focus on today is how Walleys Quarry shows the flaws in the current regulatory environment. As a precursor, however, I'd like to briefly tell the House the story of a company called Atlantic Waste. Over the winter of 2003-04, the Environment Agency received many complaints from local residents about odour coming from Kingscliff, a waste site near Peterborough run by Atlantic Waste. The agency was concerned about inappropriate deposits and treatment at the site and decided to investigate. The investigation revealed that several 100,000 tonnes of waste had been deposited above agreed levels, and the height of the waste threatened to make the landfill unstable. But instead of complying with this investigation, Atlantic Waste Chief Executive, Mr Adrian Kirby, and their Marketing Director, Mr Adam Sher, did some investigating of their own. They hired a detective agency, Active Investigation Services, under the guise of concerns about break-ins. This detective agency accepted Atlantic's proposal to tap phones and hack into computers. They hacked into residents' computers by sending them emails with attachments purported to contain the results of tests undertaken on the landfill. And when the police began investigating this agency, they found a complex web of staff, associates and clients involved in illegal activities. That detective agency had fitted devices to telegraph poles, roadside junction boxes all over the UK, listening in to over 1,000 calls. Now, following this investigation, Adam Sher and Adrian Kirby were arrested. Each pled guilty to conspiracy to cause modification of computer equipment and conspiracy to intercept communications unlawfully. Adrian Kirby received 6 months in jail, Adam Sher received 3. A handful of years later, Adam Sher, now a convicted criminal, was appointed to Red Industries Limited. Red Industries, under Mr Sher's control, took over Walleys Quarry landfill in Silverdale, in my constituency, the very same landfill I brought to this House's attention over and over again. It's incomprehensible to me that a man with this history would ever be allowed to operate a waste site. And yet that's the bizarre and troubling world in which we find ourselves. It wouldn't be allowed in the football business. They have a decent fit and proper person test. Yet in the waste industry, it seems nothing could be done to prevent a man with a proven disregard for the law, a proven disregard for the regulator, a proven disregard for residents from assuming responsibility for an environmental permit. In a letter to me dated the 6th of May 2021, James Bevan, the Chief Executive of the EA, Sir James Bevan, confirmed that in the case of an application to transfer the permit, The regulations require the EA to consider, quotes, whether the prospective new owners are likely to comply with the permit conditions, quotes. In considering this, they may take into account their management systems, technical competence, compliance history, financial competence, and any, quote, relevant convictions which they are allowed to take into account. It doesn't include spent convictions, but even if Mr. Share's conviction had not been at this point spent, it was not apparently relevant. This is despite the EA itself being a victim of his previous crime. We must have a better fit and proper person test if we're going to avoid criminals entering the waste industry. Now, the rehabilitation of offenders is a noble goal, but it cannot override good sense and the public interest. People with this sort of track record of disregarding the regulator cannot be allowed to simply bide their time and re-enter the industry a few years on. Wally's Quarry has also taught me a lesson about the problem of perverse incentives in the current regulatory regime. Landfill tax was introduced very successfully by the previous Conservative government in 1996 to disincentivise landfill, encouraging the switch to more sustainable waste management. It's worked. The amount of waste going to landfill has decreased by over 50%. Household recycling has increased by 70%. But a consequence of this and its benefits has been to increase the attractiveness of the waste industry to organised crime because of the incentives that landfill tax creates. And we know there are very few barriers to entry in this business. Landfill tax fraud often consists of falsifying paperwork relating to the classification of waste in order to pay less or zero tax. For example, labelling active waste as inactive or hazardous waste as non-hazardous. And organised crime groups and repeat offenders can deliberately routinely evade significant amounts of landfill tax by misdescribing waste. To illustrate the problem, from April 2021, the inactive rate of waste is only £3.10 per tonne. The standard rate is £96.70 per tonne. And at scale, that differential of nearly £100 a tonne results in enormous profits for the businesses involved. Businesses which routinely mislabel waste can rack up millions of pounds in illegitimate profits, robbing HMRC of an estimated £120 million a year. And I believe the current regulatory regime is inadequate in the face of such incentives. Compounding the problem, there appears to be insufficient scrutiny applied both to the operations and the accounts of those companies regularly declaring high levels of inert, i.e. the £3 a tonne landfilling. And this is not merely an economic crime again. This fraudulent misdescription can cause significant impacts for the environment, for wildlife, for the communities. Major air quality incidents can be caused by misdescribed waste containing plasterboard or other high sulphate waste entering landfills that lack the specialist measures required. If hazardous waste is misdescribed as non-hazardous, this could have a very significant impact on the health of people and the local environment. And this has direct bearing on the situation at Walleys Quarry. In evidence presented as part of that recent Court of Appeal case, Richards v. the EA, a representative of the EA explained that the increased level of hydrogen sulphide, the eggy smell, coming from Walleys Quarry landfill was most likely the result of gypsum-containing high sulphate waste being deposited in that landfill, contrary to the permit. Now, this can only have occurred as a result of some part of the waste chain mislabelling that waste or it not being properly separated from other waste. So I think we either have fraud or negligence somewhere in the chain. However, several people have contacted me to make specific allegations about illegal activities at Walleys Quarry landfill. I will, of course, keep them all anonymous, and I'm aware that we need to follow due process because there's an ongoing criminal investigation into these allegations, but I am keen to get some of the longest-standing, best evidence allegations on the record, some of which I and the Environment Agency have been aware of for nearly 12 months. The EA informed me that any investigation might take multiple years. Well, I feel that my constituents deserve to know the true scale and the nature of the problems that have been reported to me. In February last year, I was contacted by an anonymous individual who alleged that the current operator was using the site to bury hazardous waste outside its agreed permit. I was told this increased dramatically during lockdown, a period during which the EA ceased many of its normal activities. And employees were named, I won't name them here, who would have been involved in this activity. And the order to bury these hazardous wastes, according to the anonymous source, came directly from Mr. Adam Share, who is the company's CEO and owner, from Mr. Nigel Bowen, the company managing director, and from Mr. John Clues, who is the company technical director. There have been other, less specific allegations too from multiple other sources. I've had many whistleblowers come to me. I've passed them all on to the Environment Agency. The House may also be aware that on the 6th of January this year, I raised concerns about so-called lawfare in the Chamber in the debate led by my right honourable friend here, and I referred to the attempts by The Guardian to publish an article about Walleys Quarry. I've been aware since November 2021 that they have been attempting to publish a story about the true scale of the issues at Walleys Quarry in my constituency, based on insider testimony of whistleblowers backed up by emails from within the company, and have thus far been prevented from publishing due to the legal threats made by Red Industries against the newspaper. And with the permission of Rachel Salvage, a journalist who has the courage to pursue this story in the public interest, I will read directly her words, the allegations she has been seeking to publish. Quote, hazardous waste, including arsenic, rat poison and zinc, has been tipped at a Newcastle-under-Lyme landfill, which is now the subject of a criminal investigation. The Guardian has seen internal emails discussing the practice at Red Industries, the operator at Walleys Quarry. A whistleblower, a former senior executive at Red, has alleged widespread illegal behaviour at the firm and has accused the regulator, the Environment Agency, of, quote, being asleep at the wheel. The whistleblower has provided the Guardian with emails that appear to show hazardous material is routinely dumped at Walleys to save the company's money. In October 2019, Red's compliance officer emailed colleagues about a shipment of cavity wax from a car manufacturer. Quote, is this for ATM or do we have another route in mind? End quote. This cavity wax is hazardous and organic and should be shipped overseas to a company called ATM in Holland, which breaks it down into safer waste, but this process is expensive. In the emails, Red's group commercial manager replies, quote, Walleys TFS, end quote. According to the whistleblower, this is an internal code for sending hazardous waste to Walleys that should be safely shipped overseas. As a result, the former senior executive said the cavity wax was secretly dumped at the landfill. Another email refers to, quote, everyone's favourite Walleys TFS route, end quote, for the cavity wax. The manufacturer of this cavity wax warns the material is, quote, toxic in contact with skin and, quote, toxic if inhaled. Dr. Cecilia MacLeod, an expert in contaminated land from the University of Greenwich, said exposure to components in the wax, quotes, can cause issues with development and can also cause dermatitis and breathing difficulties, end quote. Continuing the article. In July 2020, the group commercial manager emailed colleagues about a waste shipment of spent bullets containing hazardous levels of arsenic and zinc. Quote, what do you reckon to this shit show of material? Sounds like a wash and Walleys TFS to me, end quote. Again, the whistleblower says, using the internal code Walleys TFS to divert the hazardous waste to Walleys landfill. Another email chain discusses a large shipment of rat poison. A Red employee asked, quote, are you able to accept this to landfill or would it not be suitable, end quote. Their manager responded, quote, work your magic, end quote, and the shipment was sent to Walleys landfill, the former senior executive said. The rodenticide is highly toxic as it can be fatal if swallowed, breathed in or if it comes into contact with skin. Continuing, a former Red employee told The Guardian, quote, we used to take advantage of the fact that the EA was stupid. It's not difficult. When the EA came to inspect, we didn't worry. We just made sure that all the stickers looked nice. They weren't chemists, so you could always hide things, end quote. Only solid waste is permitted at Walleys landfill, but The Guardian has seen evidence that Red has also been tipping hazardous paint. In July 2020, a Red compliance officer emailed colleagues about a, quote, paint route. The shipment was, quote, coming as has, and they're priced £200 a tonne. We haven't got the money for any TFS, end quote. The former senior executive told The Guardian, quote, this material is hazardous, so Walleys would not be permitted to accept it. But in reality, this is where the paint tins are going, end quote. The manufacturer of this paint warns, quote, this product is classified as dangerous. Exposure to component sulfur vapour concentrations may result in respiratory system irritation and adverse effects on the kidneys, liver and central nervous system, end quote. A former Red subcontractor was also told The Guardian how paint was concealed in unlegitimate material. Quotes, they'd mix it with cement to try and thicken it up and load it into a skip and tip it like that, end quote. MacLeod described the pollutants as, quotes, a horrible cocktail and said that Red might think that mixing paint with cement would stabilise and solidify it, quotes, but not all the volatile organic compounds get locked up. They're still there and you'll have respiratory problems if you take these things in. A former senior executive at Red sent some of these emails to the Environment Agency in May 2021, along with testimony of Red's alleged law-breaking. In December, the EA announced a criminal investigation into Red. End quote, and I thank Rachel Salvage for providing me with that information. Investigations of the public record show examples from staff from Red Industries demanding the wording of compliance assessment reforms issued by the EA is changed, and the EA acquiescing. To paraphrase my constituent, Dr. Michael Salt, who's a nuclear scientist but has volunteered a significant amount of time to the Stop the Stink campaign, if I said the same thing to the Office of Nuclear Regulation, they'd have something to say about it. The EA are a regulator with no teeth, who inspire no fear, and whom I cannot have confidence. There is clearly serious failures here which the EA need to account for. And in light of these revelations, I must ask that the operator's permit is suspended while these allegations are fully investigated. The EA's current approach has not worked. If the only explanation they can find for why we are once again seeing so many exceedances of the World Health Organization odour annoyance limits is the cold weather. And if there are such serious issues with the handling of such a sensitive case, how can anyone have confidence they're handling more routine cases appropriately? Another area the Walleys Quarry experience has taught me needs reform is in the bonds that these permitted operators must hold, which are staggeringly insufficient in the eventuality an operator walks away from a landfill or goes bust. I'm aware many constituents are joining a class action against Walleys Quarry. If that's successful, it would almost certainly make the company go bust, and there's not sufficient bond to account for that. Surely, walking away from your responsibility should not be get-out-of-jail-free card. These bonds need to reflect the actual risks involved. Now, the cost of doing bad business is not high enough. The fines when people are found to have breached the rules are too mild to be a proper deterrent. For example, some other cases recently, in November 2019, a company director was fined £1,272 for abandoning a Shropshire waste site. Clearing the site cost £45,000. In July 2021, a man was fined £1,000 for dumping waste in South West London, plus £500 cost and a £100 victim surcharge. But the clear-up and associated costs to the landowner total in excess of £100,000. These are simply not sufficient deterrents. I'd also like to briefly make another point, that of funding for the regulator. I note the recent articles on the front page of The Guardian, but I have personally been repeatedly assured by the EA that there is no issue relating to costs or resources in the regulation of Walleys Quarry. I want to assure my constituents... I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and congratulate him on making such a strong case on behalf of his constituents who have been affected in this case. But on the broader point, one of the challenges that the Environment Agency faces is being able to collect and collate the right information to bring an effective prosecution or to take action against offenders. And I can think of a similar case, with very different circumstances in my own constituency, where there have been those kinds of challenges. And I wonder, what would he ask of the Minister to support the Environment Agency in the challenge in being able to bring together the right information in these cases to bring a challenge?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. And clearly the Environment Agency do need more powers. As I was saying, I've reassured my constituents there's no financial pressure, but I'm not convinced that more money would necessarily solve the severe cultural problem within the Environment Agency. They don't need more money if they're too weak to use it. And I accept that they perhaps have been subject to the same legal threats as the Guardian campaigners myself have had, but as a regulator they must be stronger, they must act in the public interest. If funding is the problem, DEFRA must address this. Finally, I was expecting to come here to push for other policies, but I'm very pleased to note recent significant consultations launched this month by DEFRA on the carriers, brokers and dealers regime and the consultation to develop a central digital waste tracking service, which would address many concerns that there is no comprehensive way of tracking waste. I'd also like to briefly touch on other types of waste crime, but I'll let others speak more about it. On the lowest level, there is something that's rife in, I'm sure, everyone's constituency, that's fly tipping. Recently, in Newcastle-under-Lyme, there's been fly tipping off Watermills Road in Chesterton, but I'll leave that to the Honourable Member for Darlington, who I understand wants to speak about that in his speech. And another area is illegal waste dumps. I know other members may want to pick up on that, but I must put on record my concern about how these have been policed by the Environment Agency too. For the past decade, constituents in the northwest of my constituency have had to suffer through an organised illegal waste dump at Doddlespool Farm. Fleets of lorries have travelled from far afield to drop their loads of waste at the site to avoid paying the landfill tax. The lorries have blocked roads, there have been fires, rat infestations, and waste has spilled out, potentially contaminating watercourses and the food chain. The EA took court action in 2017. The landowner was required to remove the waste or face further court action. He was also hit with a £6,100 court bill, again inadequate, and yet the waste has not been removed 5 years on from that court case. I can't comment further on the present situation due to sub judice rules, but I think it's clear that that fine was evidently not a serious enough punishment to make the landowner change their ways. I'm conscious I've taken a long time. In conclusion, we need to look thoroughly at the problems within the current regulatory regime, the scale of criminality in this sector, and I look forward to the rest of the debate.
Thank you. The question is that this House has considered criminality within and regulation of the waste industry. Colleagues, we have 9 people who wish to speak now, and wind-ups begin at 5:10. So you've got 2.5 minutes each. Kevin Jones.
Can I congratulate the Honourable Member from Newcastle-under-Lyme for securing this debate? He has summed it up very well. And I've been involved in this last 10 years, along with the Right Honourable Member for Houghton, Cross and Holden, in terms of trying to expose this. Everyone knows about what's going on. They know the lack of regulation. They know about the low threshold for actually getting into the industry. And they know that it's a major issue in terms of involvement in organised crime. The HMRC themselves, in their tax gap report, recognises some 22% is not being paid, although they actually put a profit warning on that. The Environment Agency know that it's not just what's been lost in tax revenues, but they also know that the clean-up costs are going to fall on the taxpayer. And everyone knows, Mr. Streeter, that this involves organised crime. Now, I've raised it over the last 10 years, and I'm sure the Right Honourable Member for Houghton, Cross and Holden will allude to this as well. We've explained all this to government, but there seems to be an inaction in actually trying to get the agencies together. The Environment Agency are not capable of doing this. They may be very good at cuddling newts and protecting our protecting forests, but what they're not good at is having an enforcement attitude. The HMRC, frankly, are a disgrace, and I'll give you an example why I say that. I got involved in this because of a company in the North East called Miramax. You only had to look at the directors of this company to say there was something wrong. Organised criminals, one of them now is in prison for murder, and his associates, the police told me, had convictions and involvement in a whole host of organised crime. They suddenly got involved in waste management. Bought a landfill site that I know the right honourable gentleman will talk about in his constituency, and 1 and 2 in the North East. They then set out to undercut legitimate businesses. And if you talk to anybody in the waste industry, there is no way they could actually be picking that waste up at the amounts they were charged. It ended up with Operation Nosedive, which the HMRC instigated in 2014, where they raided the premises. They claimed £78 million was to be reclaimed. That suddenly got halted in 2020. Myself and the Right Honourable Gentleman then tried to ask why it had been halted. We were then told, no, you can't look into this because it's the HMRC. The National Auditor have actually done a very good investigation, which showed it spent 6 years, £3.5 million of public money, and no conviction, no outcome. Can I just, in finishing, say this, Mr. Streeter? Everyone knows what the problem is. There've got to be action. And I'm sorry, I'll say to the Minister, I don't want more initiatives about fly tipping and this, that and the other. I actually want coordinated action between those agencies that have got their powers to actually crack down on this.
Right honourable friend has made half the case from my point of view. In my constituency, over 10 years ago, a company called City Plant took over an existing site and has broken the rules time and time again throughout the first 5 years, and eventually ended up in court, got a slap on the wrist, broke the rules time and time again thereafter. And it still seems that City Plant is up to their old tricks. Residents today report the mix of materials being brought on site is not what's been agreed. Again, a repeat of other examples. They report noxious odours across the entire area, the destruction really of their enjoyment of life in pursuit of illegal profits. And as my right honourable friend said, the people who are benefiting from the weakness of the Environment Agency are not small-time crooks. They're hardened criminals at the heart of the criminal underworld. He mentioned Miramax, we've already heard about. The majority shareholder he referred to, Neil Elliott, serving 15 years for murder. An associate, Sean Morfitt, previously a part owner of Miramax, currently serving 18 years for drug trafficking offences, and prior to that served over 6 years for a vicious machete attack. These are the sort of people we are dealing with. Tax evasion in this industry is enormously costly. My right honourable friend said 78 million. I think the expected bill went up to 158 million. 14 individuals are arrested, and yet the outcome? Nothing. A few £1,000s paid over. We need to know why this is happening. We need to know why the state has no teeth in the protection of ordinary people, the lives of ordinary people, and the collection of proper taxes from these criminals in these unpleasant industries.
Thank you. Jim Chandler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I congratulate the honourable gentleman for Newcastle upon Line for bringing this forward. I'd also perhaps like also put on record and thank him for his duty to his constituents in the way that he's fought this campaign. I think while we don't know everything about it, I personally don't, Mr. Chairman, but I'm very, very pleased that the honourable gentleman has got a good grasp of it and congratulate him. I want to very quickly, as I always do in these debates, give an ordinary perspective to the criminality, to the issues that are happening to us back home. In my constituency of Strangford, I have there wouldn't be a week pass where I wouldn't have the issue of fly tipping or instances of illegal activity taking place in relation to waste management and waste disposal. And whether it be deliberate misdescription of waste, whether it be illegal dumping, waste burning, or the fly tipping, they're incredible issues for me. Just last week, the Minister, in a question in DEFRA, very kindly responded to the issue of fly tipping in the question, so I thank her for that in advance. DERA in Northern Ireland concluded there were 306 illegal waste sites that were using some £0.6 million of taxpayers' money. Again, as others have illustrated, this is an issue where loads of money seem to be chasing hands, and there's good advantages for those involved in it. 16,000 tonnes of waste tires were discovered, of which 30% of these were sent to unknown destinations. 22.5% of Northern Ireland waste crimes were for illegal dumping. Again, the local councils who have a responsibility for and the lack of scrutiny around people paying fines is due to disruption from the COVID-19 pandemic. I know that the COVID-19 pandemic created lots of issues for us all, but I'm just wondering, in light of we're now coming out of the COVID pandemic, that things would perhaps improve, and maybe the Minister can indicate that to us. Criminality in our waste industry must be further regulated, and we cannot expect to see any improvement if it's not. And it's time to disrupt the illegal activities leading to the arrest of suspected waste criminals and bringing them to justice. And again, I look to the Minister here to outline what steps will be taken to ascertain that. The comments made here today are testament there's still more work to be done. I'm hopeful for the engagement by the Minister with the devolved institutions, which the Minister has given a commitment that last Thursday, and what more can be done. There's always more we can do to tackle the figures given today support this claim. There's no reason for anyone in today's society for damaging landscape and running some of the most precious beauty spots we have across the great United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Thank you.
I really welcome the opportunity to speak on this vital debate, which has been secured by my parliamentary neighbour and friend, the honourable member for Newcastle and Lyme. He's made a strong and clear case for the need for more action to tackle the blight of criminal activity in the waste industry. This appalling activity is putting tens of thousands of lives at risk across the country. And in my own constituency, I've been fighting for a lasting solution to one such waste crime that had the potential to be a national disaster. Yet as the site in question is being cleared, up and down the country, unscrupulous criminals are filling warehouses or plots of land next to residential properties and littering our countryside with waste, which presents a real threat to the health and safety of surrounding communities. I wrote to the Prime Minister and multiple departments last year to highlight the urgency of clearing a site that has been a significant risk in Stoke-on-Trent Central since 2014. And I'm delighted that my campaign has resulted in clearing the Twyford House site of in excess of 30,000 tonnes of illegal and combustible commercial waste. And may I thank the Minister for her support in making this happen so that the danger that's been there since 2014 can finally be removed. My honourable friend, the member for Newcastle under Lyme's tireless work to tackle the environmental disaster at Walleys Quarry landfill is an example to us all. Although the site of the quarry is in his constituency, the consequences of activities at that site are suffered by my constituents too. And I've also been persistently raising their concerns to the Environment Agency and ministers. And the pace of progress to resolve the problem has been a frustration to us all. I would ask the Minister whether she agrees that there is a clear need for the separation of regulation and enforcement authorities. The current approach to regulation of, I think, over 180,000 waste carriers, brokers and dealers is leading to record levels of crime. And this may well spike later this year when the increased cost of red diesel will mean that many will look to cutting corners, to making savings, for example, through the use of exemptions codes. It is a sad fact that waste crime is more lucrative on the basis of risk to reward ratios than human trafficking or drug dealing. It is not a victimless crime. Public health and public safety are dependent on stopping the serious waste industry criminals. We must have better regulation and tougher sentences.
Thank you very much. We can now go 3 minutes each. Peter Gibson.
Thank you, Sir Gary. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And may I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Newcastle under Lyme, for securing this debate and his speedy gallop through the problem and his relentless campaigning on Wally's Quarry. People up and down the country take pride in their towns and streets. However, fly tipping is an illegal and unacceptable antisocial act that continues to blight communities across the country. In my own constituency of Darlington, fly tipping takes place on a daily basis, which costs local authority thousands of pounds every year to remove. Local residents will often contribute to this crime unknowingly, paying what they believe to be a reputable waste disposal business in good faith, only for their items to be disposed of by being illegally dumped. I'm pleased to report that Darlington Borough Council, now Conservative-led since 2019, has been delivering for local people, and I want to take the opportunity to praise them for their hard work. They have been taking action on the issue of fly tipping and working hard to tackle the problem, which had been neglected by the previous Labour administration. But there is more that can be done. So much depends on local people reporting incidents of fly tipping or reporting those involved. We should also be looking at simple but effective deterrents, such as the installation of bollards to prevent vehicles from driving down alleyways, which would enable them to stop dumping waste. I'm pleased that the government have recognised the problem posed by fly tipping and have provided local authority with enhanced enforcement powers to tackle this crime. I'm also delighted that the government has empowered local authorities that are also waste collection authorities to search and seize vehicles. And I can report that vehicles have been seized in Darlington in the last year, where they have been suspected of involvement in illegal fly tipping. The removal of waste is a commonplace, everyday task that many of us deal with. People should not have to be fearful of being taken advantage of by criminals or having their towns blighted by illegally dumped waste. Whilst I'm pleased to see the government taking action to empower local authorities to deal with this issue, more still needs to be done, and I hope that the government will give serious consideration to what more can be done to encourage a culture of actual enforcement and proper prosecution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I appreciate the honourable member for Newcastle under Lyme bringing this important issue to us today. Waste industry crime is extremely serious. The cases referred to today around the country are causing untold misery for people, particularly when there's public health issues and for farmers, and they're costing the taxpayer around £1 billion a year. We have actually a wonderful waste management company in my patch of Stroud called Smiths. Their reach and organisation is so strong that they actually do much to combat poor environmental practices, and they support thousands of businesses in the southwest. They deal with festivals and all sorts of things. So we know that this work can be done really well, yet the true scale of waste crime is quite difficult to quantify, with the Environment Agency estimating that 18% of all waste is illegally managed. When we know that, and when we know that that amount is enough to fill Wembley Stadium with waste, we do want to see greater action and certainly greater enforcement. In Stroud, around 900 instances of fly tipping are cleared locally per annum. I've reported this myself, and Stroud District Council do a good job of responding and labelling and making sure they are pulling in the horrid waste dumping. But it shouldn't really fall for them. This is education. This is. We need penalties. We need those deterrents to come through. The front page of our local papers, Stroud News and Journal, recently refers to an unlicensed waste collector causing additional difficulties, and I realise that this is happening for local authorities around the country. This one particular chap received a court fine of over £1,400 from Cheltenham magistrates, and I thank Stroud District Council and the police for dealing with this, but also to the papers for showing that there are court actions going ahead and people are being punished. And I want to thank my rural crime team, the police, for all that they do to help farmers. Farmers are often at the sharp end of dealing with horrible fly tipping, and they are already struggling for cash usually, and it's a very difficult thing for them to do so. Listen, I am grateful to the Minister for all that she does. I know she's very committed to this issue, and to all of my colleagues today for ranging such a range of problems that fall under the banner of waste crime. It is clear to me, listening to colleagues, that our government bodies are struggling here. So I do look forward to learning more about improvements on legislation, regulation and enforcement for this nasty, expensive public health hazard. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Gary. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I want to commend my friend and neighbour, the Honourable Member for Newcastle and Lyme, for securing today's important debate and his continued work standing up for not just the people of Silverdale, but wider North Staffordshire who are affected by Walleys Quarry. I also want to highlight again the great work of my friend and also neighbour, the Honourable Member for Stoke-on-Trent Central, in starting to clear the Twyford House site in Etruria of 30,000 tonnes of commercial and illegal waste. This is a serious issue, and I couldn't agree more with my honourable friend, the member for Darlington, when he talks about fly tipping. And it's blighting the constituency of Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and Talk, whether that be particularly in Golden Hill and Sandyford, or Bursland Park on Park Estate, or the alleyways in Tunstall. The scumbags who continue to litter in our local area need to be brought to heel, and we need to make sure that they are absolutely sent out in high-vis chain gangs, litter picking and cleaning up their community, because it is simply unacceptable that those people that obey the law, who do the right thing, who love the local area which they live in, should have to suffer because of a mindless minority of morons, in my opinion. But sadly, Sir Gary, the blight seems to continue to be spreading when it comes to the waste industry. And the latest case within North Staffordshire is the landfill off Port Hill Road in Longport. It is affecting the constituents of Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and Talk in particular, and locals already are having to deal with the disgraceful way that Price & Kensington Teapot Works has been allowed to rot by its rogue landlord. It's nearby Bursland. People have recently seen a key part of the mother town heritage, the Leper Pub, go up in flame. And now residents are having to live with the disgusting smells coming from the landfill off Port Hill Road in Longport. Staffordshire Waste Recycling Centre Limited are digging up Stoke-on-Trent's past at the landfill, seemingly digging for materials they have never had permission to do this. And yet the company has now applied for retrospective planning permission to work at this landfill, something which I and the residents of Longport, Middleport, Dalehall, Burslem and the surrounding area are absolutely opposed to. And I'll be making my objection to this application clear in a letter to Stoke-on-Trent City Council shortly. I'm happy to give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for giving way. And just as I've been very grateful for his support and my honourable friend from Stoke Central and Stoke South support on the Walleys, I've had complaints about this landfill from my constituency in Newcastle-under-Lyme. I listened to what he said in the Honourable Member for Orpington's adjournment debate last week, and I want him and his constituents to know that I stand with him on this one.
Thank you very much, and I couldn't be more grateful to my honourable friend, and this is why we are a tour de force in North Staffordshire, constantly walking around as some sort of North Staffordshire mafia, which I'm proud to be part of at every opportunity. The company has also repeatedly breached their permit at the neighbouring site, where they do have permission to operate. There have been many incidents reported at the site in 2021, including 4 in the run-up to Christmas. A site visit by the Environment Agency on January the 21st of this year found multiple breaches of permit, including the storage of too much hazardous waste on the site, as well as the storage of scrap metal, which the permit does not allow for. I am encouraged to have learned from the Environment Agency that they will be carrying out further inspections this week, and have engaged with the company to get them to sort their operation out. I also know that the Environment Agency and Stoke-on-Trent City Council are having a joint meeting on Thursday this week to discuss the problems at this site, and I look forward to being updated from the outcome of those investigations and meetings early next week. When the people who run waste sites fail to keep their sites safe and manage them in a way that is inconsiderate of their neighbours, it has a huge impact on people's physical and mental well-being, as well as the feel-good factor of a place we are proudly calling home. We need to make sure these companies can be properly controlled and brought to heel when they do wrong.
Right time. Turn to our front bench speeches. First to our 5 minutes each. Deirdre Brock.
Thank you very much, Gary. And it's a great pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I commend the MP for Newcastle-under-Lyme for bringing this really important debate. It is really clear from everything that's been said by members across the room today that illegally dumped waste is a massive scourge which is blighting communities across the UK with huge environmental, social and economic costs. Indeed, this is not, as our Justice Secretary and the Chair of the Serious and Organised Crime Task Force Scotland, Keith Brown, said recently, a victimless crime. Waste crime causes pollution, it increases public health risks, it places enormous strain on legitimate operators, and serious and organised waste criminals have a considerable impact on the economy of all the nations of the UK. Every year in Scotland, 250 million easily visible items are dropped as litter, and an estimated 26,000 tonnes of material is fly-tipped. According to Zero Waste Scotland research, at least £53 million of public money is spent... Yes, of course.
Very interesting about the zero waste strategy that Scotland... But is she aware that the way operating Scotland to get around that is actually just transferring it over the border, many of it into North East? And having raised it with the Scottish Government, nothing seems to be happening about that.
Interesting. I'm going to be talking about a coordinated approach that all the 4 nations of the UK are going to be taking to exactly these sorts of issues. And certainly I'll be going on to mention a programme last night, Disclosure Scotland, which features on BBC Scotland, I would highly recommend all the members in the House look at that, because it talks about the opposite, actually, where waste criminals are heading over the border to Scotland and doing exactly the same. So I believe it costs Scottish councils £11 million of that £53 million, and that is only for removal from council-owned land, remember. A high proportion of these individuals or companies involved in illegal waste dumping are also associated with other organised crime, including violence, drugs, weapons and money laundering. And that BBC Scotland disclosure programme, you can find it on your iPlayer, exposed the scale and severity of that waste criminality in that episode aired last night. It was entitled Dirty Business, aptly enough. Now, it highlighted a wide range of illegal activity, from man-with-a-van fly tipping and waste being burnt in a drum to, of course, much larger scale operations such as enormous illegal landfills and increasingly abandoned lorry trailers which are overflowing with waste and simply left to rot. Now, this programme showed investigations by the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, SEPA, including on a site where a criminal gang had buried large amounts of waste underground, releasing harmful gases and liquids as the deposit degraded. Some of that was being brought from out with Scotland by the gang and is believed to include hazardous clinical waste from hospitals. The programme revealed that threats and intimidation have been made against landowners who refused to allow waste to be buried on their land, and others spoken to by the BBC were too scared to go on the record. These shocking activities, and I believe they will be to the majority of viewers of that programme, and indeed to listeners to this debate today, show that waste criminality goes far beyond simply small-scale fly tipping. It's why the Serious and Organised Crime Task Force Scotland, chaired, as I said, by the Scottish Justice Secretary Keith Brown, has made waste crime a top priority. The Scottish Government and the partners on the task force will use every means at their disposal to ensure that these illegal practices stop and that those who dump waste illegally are held accountable. Because although offenders risk criminal convictions, fines of up to £40,000 and or imprisonment for 12 months, only a fraction of those responsible are prosecuted. As we've heard today, criminals operate across borders and with similar methods. So collaboration and intelligence sharing across the UK is extremely important. The Joint Unit for Waste Crime, established in 2020, already brings together law enforcement and environmental protection agencies from across the UK. The SNP want to see this built upon by the introduction of mandatory electronic waste tracking and a UK-wide database of registered brokers, and I'm sure the Minister will speak on that shortly, which was another recommendation of the independent review. That will make it easier to find these culprits and ensure they are brought to justice. I mean, I think viewers of the programme last night would have been completely shocked by the huge amounts of waste revealed, which for far too many of us is, when out of sight, simply out of mind. But across the UK, particularly since the UK has been prevented from exporting much of its waste and recycling by other countries, quite rightly tightening their rules on imported waste, we are starting to drown in waste, and it is essential we find means of dealing with it much more effectively. Scotland's committed to building a circular economy, meaning we reduce demand for raw materials. We want to support and make the system fairer for those operating legally, whose businesses are being drastically undercut by criminals. And we certainly support the UK Government's plans to introduce waste monitoring. The consultation on the proposals to ensure that they work for Scotland will be of great importance to us. We certainly look forward to the outcomes, but our preferred outcome is for mandatory electronic monitoring. It's imperative we work together to root out waste crime and bring perpetrators to justice.
Sir Gary, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship again this afternoon. I'm very grateful to lead for the opposition in this debate this afternoon, but I would also like to acknowledge the member for Newcastle-under-Lyme for calling it. At the outset of my remarks, I'd like to pay tribute to all the campaigners in North Staffordshire working to stop the stink at Walleys, Quarry in Silverdale. And I think of people like Helen Vincent, Dr Michael Salt, Dr Scott from Silverdale Practice, Nat and Angela Wint, Graham Eagles and Steve Meakin, Councillor Amelia Rout and Councillor Sue Moffat. I also think of William Cross, Sean Rooney, Tom Curry, Lauren Curry, Dr Ian Sinner and of course Rebecca Curry and young Matthew. These people and many more, like Adrian Colette Hartveld, want to be able to lead their lives, raise their families and breathe the air around them in safety. I know from my visit to Silverdale and the discussions that I had with the local residents how much stress, concern and fear the hydrogen sulphide emissions emitted from that site is causing, and the effect that waste-related issues have on people's lives. And I want to acknowledge all the other campaigners who care and want change desperately. And I'd also like to acknowledge the tireless and passionate work of local councillors in this community. And on my visit, I was joined by a number of these, including Councillor Andy Fox-Hewitt, Councillor Dave Jones, Councillor Jill Williams, Councillor John Williams, and also Councillor Adam Jogi, who works in my team. The issues there, Sir Gary, are real and they are harmful, and the government needs to act now. And if the Minister won't take my word for it, then I ask her to reflect on the fact that in just 1 week in June 2021, the Environment Agency received 1,207 complaints from the residents across Silverdale, Clayton, the Westlands and the wider Newcastle-under-Lyme area. That strength of feeling must surely speak for itself. The true scale of waste crime, as pointed out by the Commons Library staff in their helpful briefing ahead of this debate, says that it's difficult to quantify. But it is estimated that 18% of all waste is illegally managed, equating to approximately 34 megatons. And that's the equivalent of enough waste to fill Wembley Stadium 30 times over, a shocking statistic that must surely prompt the government to act. The impacts of waste crime are widespread, with adverse effects on individuals, businesses, public services, the environment and the economy. And indeed, the Environment Agency's 2021 report stated that waste crime costs the economy in England an estimated £1 billion per year. And this is a 55% increase since its last estimate made in 2015. So the problem is real, and I would be grateful if the Minister could update the House on the work of the Joint Unit for Waste Crime, that's already been mentioned, and it would be helpful to know the scale and frequency of engagement between agencies and with the devolved administrations, the reach and scope of the unit's current work, and any plans for the coming period. Fly tipping and illegal waste dumping blights communities across England, and this government has got to get a grip nationally and locally when it comes to ensuring local government has the resources it needs to keep our communities green, clean and waste-free. An ambition I know that many residents in Newcastle-under-Lyme want and they deserve. In recent weeks and months, I'm very grateful that colleagues in both Houses of Parliament have raised waste-related issues through a range of written parliamentary questions, including the member for Huddersfield, the Noble Baroness Jones of Whitchurch in the other place, the Honourable member for Birmingham Ladywood, and the member for North Durham, who has also already spoken eloquently in today's debate. Indeed, the member for Durham asked the Minister in June 2021 about the adequacy of the Environment Agency's surveillance powers. And the Minister then said there had been no assessments on the adequacy of these powers. And I asked her, is that still the case today? So this is in addition to obviously questions that have been asked from the government benches as well of the Minister and DEFRA, and I do want to acknowledge their questions too. So Gary, it's clear that from what is happening in communities like Newcastle-under-Lyme, that waste has a huge impact on the lives of many people across the country. And I do note that the government has in the last 10 days set out 2 new consultations in relation to tackling crime. And I wish these consultations well, but more importantly, we want to see swift action. I would also like the Minister to address in her closing remarks the approach to landfill and to incineration, because we do need an open and honest discussion about how we tackle waste in our country, and we need to know where the Minister is on these issues. The scourge of waste crime across England is a task we must all work together to address, and I look forward to working with the Minister, the member for Newcastle-under-Lyme and all colleagues to address these issues and to protect and clean these green and pleasant lands. Thank you.
Minister, to respond, would you please leave 2 minutes for Mr Bell to have the final word? Joe Churchill.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir Gary, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I would like to firstly congratulate my honourable friend for securing this debate and for the determined way in which he's championed this issue in this House. Indeed, all the neighbouring Stoke MPs for the way they have really got to grips with waste in their area. And it was really clear to me that Newcastle-under-Lyme was top of the list of places that I should visit as soon as I became a minister. And I thank him and the members of his community for welcoming me, including Dr. Salt and others, and talking so frankly about the impact that Walleys has on their life, but also being constructive proactive in the way we move forward to ensure that ultimately what we want is we want to reduce landfill, we want to make sure that people can live their lives in the areas they choose, are not blighted by the effects. Now, again, he has always taken care in articulating the views of his residents, and the Environment Agency continues to bring about that work that the long-term solution at Walleys Quarry needs, and both he and I will continue to watch the situation very closely. The Honourable Lady opposite referred to a large number of issues last year, but indeed we've seen a spike on one of the monitors up to those sort of levels again recently, and I would like to reassure his constituents that I get those weekly reports and examine them in some detail, because it is important that we are rigorous in making sure that where we need to challenge, we have the right data. And that goes to really the points of all honourable members, making sure, indeed, the honourable member for my neighbour for South Suffolk and North Ipswich, making sure we have that correct data in which people can proceed then to enforcement and so on, because they have the accuracy of the challenge in front of them, of course.
Remarkable. In 26 years of the landfill tax, the HMRC have not taken one single successful prosecution for landfill tax. The only one I'm aware of is Operation Nosedive, where they spent 6 years looking at it, spending £3.5 million of public money and getting nowhere. So it's not about new regulation, it's about using the tools we've already got.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would actually say it is about using tools. He refers to an operation by HMRC. Obviously, I'm not the minister responsible for that, and I'm sure he can take that up specifically with them around Operation Nosedive. But he does make a very cogent point that actually making sure that, as several members said, this has been referred to by others as akin to the narcotics industry. It is that invidious. It blights people's lives, and it, as we have heard, raises considerable sums of money illegally in so doing. So I would agree with everybody that we need firmer action, and I will continue to make sure that we actually look at this. I'm also aware that the Environment Agency has recently launched an investigation into the allegations of criminal activity at Walleys Quarry, and I welcome any investigation where allegations of waste crime have been made, and I am sure that the Environment Agency will investigate this thoroughly, knowing that we are all watching. I appreciate the importance of this investigation to my honourable friend and his constituents, and I'm sure that he will appreciate that I wouldn't want to inadvertently say something which would jeopardise it in any way, but my door is always open to him, as he knows. This government is determined to tackle waste crime because it makes life a misery for all our constituents, whether it's fly tipping on those country lanes, as alluded to by the honourable members for Stroud and Darlington, or indeed litter in our towns or pollution from waste sites. Waste crime and poor performing waste sites undermine legitimate businesses and deprive the public purse of tax income, harm the environment and communities, and in the worst cases, directly threaten health. And there is also that question of councils spending now £1 billion of taxpayers' money cleaning up after this. So actually, it affects all of us. We have already taken action to introduce those new powers to stop illegal waste sites posing a risk, including the ability to lock up sites and to force rogue operators to clean up their waste. More widely, we've given the EA an extra £60 million to tackle waste crime since 2014, on top of the wider grant in aid funding it receives from DEFRA. And I'd just like to offer a correction. At orals last week, I said on the floor of the House that this funding was given to the EA in 2019. I think. In fact, it was given to them in 2014, and I'm happy to correct the record at this point. We've also set up the Joint Unit for Waste Crime to disrupt serious and organised waste crime and reduce its impact. And I want to assure people that that is the National Crime Agency, HMRC, EA, police. We set that up about 6 months ago, and there have been more than 30 arrests in the first 24 days. So action is being taken. And the Landmark Environment Act does even more, giving agencies enhanced powers to gain evidence and to enter sites. And I was very pleased that the Honourable Member for Darlington said that they are using the powers they have to seize cars and vehicles, because life needs making difficult. Powers are there. They need to be used, and we need to encourage our councils. And to that end, we are actually bringing out best practice for councils so that they know how to best gather evidence and so on, so that prosecutions are likely to be more successful. Now, we will go further because the two consultations that have been mentioned earlier outline the next steps to tackle waste crime and support people and businesses to manage waste correctly. Electronic waste tracking ends the old-fashioned paper-based approach and gives us a modern, connected future. We will be able to track waste movements, understand exactly who moves them and to where. And this will give us powerful new abilities to audit waste movements and ensure they are disposed of correctly. I see the Honourable Member shaking his head for North Durham. Why doesn't he come and have a chat with me and tell me of all the rows that he knows? Indeed, but I am mindful that the Honourable Member will want a couple of minutes.
I'm sick of actually talking to government over the last 10 years with the Right Honourable Member for Howden, who trot out the same nonsense every time. And I've got to say, we need action. I can tell a lot of ways where you can get around electronic tracking. These people are very sophisticated, and frankly, if we haven't got the enforcement attitude with the HMRC and other agencies, frankly, you're wasting your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually think that digital tracking, EPR, consistent collection, carriers, brokers and dealers licensing regime that regulates people involved in waste, which goes back to the comments made about appropriate people running these companies. In 2019, the government expanded the list of convictions to be taken into account when assessing permit applications to include offences relating to organised crime and violent or threatening behaviour, as well as offences relating to fraud and tax. That was only in 2019, which I believe would be after the matters that the Honourable Gentleman mentioned. Actually, we need those through these new consultations. We hope to build that regulatory framework that is more powerful and can bring people to account. Now, in Darlington, more can be done, and the Honourable Member for Stroud did also note that there are good firms out there, and I think it's important that these regulations help those good firms carry on to deliver for us, and actually what we're doing is we're bearing down on those firms who act illegally. We are doing more to crack down on this crime, and we will continue to put increased pressure on. The waste carrier reforms and digital tracking we hope will be in place by 23-24, as long as the IT development and transition needs of businesses have been met. And it's important that people understand that this whole suite of measures, such as extended producer responsibility, will help meet things like mattress mountains, but also it takes the will of all of us to check who is taking your waste away, whether you're a business or an individual. It takes councils to use the measures that we are giving them to enforce further. It takes me to make sure that I am listening and we are working towards that more rigorous enforcement. And then by tackling waste crime and poor performance in the waste industry, we don't only prevent the harm and the blight to people's lives and the environment, but we ensure that resources are properly recycled or recovered and fed back into the economy. In the long term, government is committed to minimise the impact of environmental waste by reducing the amount of waste created and managing it safely. I would like to thank the Honourable Member for North Edinburgh for her offer to work together in this. I take this issue as seriously as every member in here, and I will work with all honourable members to continue to address it.
Thank you. Erin Bell, the final word.
Thank you, Sir Gary. I'd like to thank all members who've taken part in this debate. I think it's been a good debate. I've been very pleased to get so much on the record, using parliamentary privilege in some places. I'd like to thank all three Stoke MPs, as I said earlier, for the support they've given me on Wally's Quarry. I'd like to thank the member for North Durham and the member for Horton, Price and Howden for bringing their experience in this place and their long experience with the Environment Agency to bear. I can't name check everybody. I'd like to thank everybody who has contributed. There's been so much today, it feels that perhaps we should have a backbench business debate or maybe even a select committee inquiry here. I will send the Hansard of this to the member for Tiverton and Honiton who chairs the EFRA committee. I'd also like to thank the honourable member for Newport West. This has been a non-partisan exercise. It's not party political. I'm grateful that she visited Silverdale as well. She name-checked many of the heroes of the Stop the Stick campaign. She also name-checked a lot of her councillors, so in the interest of balance, I would like to thank Simon Tagg, Derek Huckfield, Andy Fear, Andy Parker, Mark Holland, Jill Heatham, Graham Hutton, James Salisbury and Paul Northcott, all councillors who have supported their residents and supported me in this case. And I'd like to thank most of all the Minister for what she said. I am encouraged by what she said. I'd like to thank her PPS. I'd like to thank her officials, actually, who've been particularly helpful in getting access to the public register for private investigators who've been looking at what's going on at Wally's Quarry. I'm grateful for everything the government's doing, but I do think there is an issue about the attitude at the Environment Agency. I know the Minister has heard me say that. She's heard many people say that today, and I know she'll use her good offices to try and change that.
The sitting stands adjourned.
The